world will never be the same. No one who was there will ever forget it.
Couldn't believe that I would see it when I had my eyes closed.
It was the most incredible sight I've ever seen in my life. So it was brilliant white yellow to start with, and developed reds and orange and purple and blue.
I was just standing there with my mouth open.
Engineer Jack Abbey has brought his camera.
I snapped the shutter wide open.
Jack Abbey's picture is the only properly exposed color still photo from that night. A new age has begun. The bomb is about to change everything.
I have to admit I didn't feel much of anything except great joy that it was a success. It was really later that we all began to think more about it.
The thing worked. And there was plutonium flowing from the Hanford reactors to Los Alamos.
Groves now knows they can make implosion bombs as fast as plutonium is produced. In Potsdam, Truman gets the news.
What to do about the Russians here? Should we tell them? What's going to happen after the war?
Truman tells Stalin the U.S. has a powerful new weapon. Stalin barely reacts, because he already knows. Klaus Fuchs has been telling the Soviets all about the bomb.
Stalin and the people closest to him were very well informed about the progress of Manhattan Project. And that's partly why at Potsdam, Stalin kind of just looks at them and doesn't say much.
Back in the U.S., now that the atomic bomb is a reality, some scientists are having misgivings about using it. Leo Szilard, who warned of a Nazi bomb, drafts a petition to the president urging him to consider the moral consequences.
Offhand, I'd have to say the scientists were probably about evenly split for and against.
Scientists also worry that using nuclear weapons now will put the U.S. in danger after the war by encouraging Stalin to pursue the bomb.
They thought if they are used, they are likely to precipitate a nuclear arms race with the Soviets.
Some scientists urge a demonstration of the bomb to give the Japanese a chance to surrender. But to the Japanese, surrender does not seem to be an option. They send kamikazes, suicide pilots, against U.S. ships. In battle after battle, their soldiers kill themselves rather than be captured. The U.S. is now firebombing their cities. 100,000 Japanese die in one night in Tokyo alone. Their war is hopeless, yet they still refuse to surrender. The next step seems unavoidable: invade Japan itself. Thousands of Americans and perhaps millions of Japanese will likely die. For Harry Truman, the bomb seems by far the lesser evil.
I may be faced with an actual land invasion of Japan. So if there's anything that can shorten the war before that and prevent it, I'm for it.
On July 26th, the Japanese are given an ultimatum: surrender unconditionally or face destruction.
The Japanese were not interested in unconditional surrender. They wanted their emperor to remain in power. They wanted to oversee their own war crimes trials. They did not want U.S. occupation of the home islands.
The Japanese reject the ultimatum. Now, all the pieces fall into alignment. Japanese leaders who cannot bring themselves to stop. A massive science project that has spent $2 billion racing to create the bomb. A president facing a horrific battle who suddenly sees an alternative. What happens next, dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan in August 1945, will become one of the most controversial decisions in American history. 70 years later, remarkably, evidence suggests the president never actually gave this order. Now that it's ready, it may be harder to stop the bomb than to let it go.
There is a question about whether or not Truman ever really authorized the use of the bomb, and it's my argument that he never did, that there was so much momentum built up that Truman, new to the job, decides not to interfere with ongoing plans.
On Tinian Island in the Pacific, the uranium gun bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, is ready. It's never been tested, but it's so simple that they are sure it will work. The bomb is loaded into the B-29 Enola Gay. A few hours before dawn on August 6th, the plane takes off. It flies 1,500 miles through the night. At 8:15 a.m. over Hiroshima, it drops the bomb. Now the bomb controls its own destiny. When it's 1,900 feet from the ground, it explodes. A fireball a quarter-mile across reaches 10,000 degrees. Anything close to the center is vaporized. Then a shock wave explodes buildings, knocking down anything in its path. Almost everything within 1 mile is totally destroyed. Only a few concrete structures remain. Where something or someone absorbed the heat, a shadow is left behind. At least 80,000 people die. Other bombings have killed more people. What's new about Hiroshima is how easy it was. 1 plane, 1 bomb. And still, even after this, the Japanese will not surrender.
The shock of the first bomb didn't quite do it, actually. They couldn't even at first accept that Hiroshima had been bombed.
The Japanese have their own plan to end the war. Behind the scenes, they have been secretly talking to the Soviets, hoping the Russians will broker a deal with the US, a conditional surrender. But 2 days later, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan. Now, the brokered conditional deal the Japanese hoped for is dead. But there's still no sign of surrender.
The level of resistance in the Japanese government was very, very difficult to understand. It was so great.
On Tinian, crews are preparing the next bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, as President Truman addresses the nation.
If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
On August 9th, a B-29 carrying the Fat Man bomb takes off. The target is Kokura. But Kokura is obscured by clouds, so the plane heads for the backup target. Because it happens to be cloudy, thousands of fortunate people are spared. Others will die in their place. The second city hit by an atomic bomb will not be Kokura, but Nagasaki. Nearby in POW Camp 17, Lester Tenney sees the explosion.
We saw this tremendous cloud rise, and it was the most unusual thing. It seemed to have a pedestal, and we had no idea what it was.
up to 70,000 people are dead. Even now, after the Soviet invasion and 2 bombs, Japanese leaders still cannot agree about surrender.
The Russians invade them, they still do not surrender. The second bomb was dropped, and then the emperor decided to surrender. Even then, the Japanese army did not want to.
Nothing speaks well for the Japanese. Nothing. The emperors and his advisors were callously uninterested in the lives of their citizens that were being lost. They just did not care about how their people were suffering.
While the Japanese leaders try to make up their minds, Groves is planning more atomic attacks.
The orders for the bomb are to keep using them as made ready, that very important phrase. So the bomb after Nagasaki if necessary, and a bomb after that if necessary, and a bomb after that if necessary.
They will drop atomic bombs as fast as they are built, 3 or 4 a month.
And finally, Truman said, enough. No more until the president authorizes them.
Finally, the day after Nagasaki, Japan agrees to surrender on one condition. They keep their emperor.
I have received this afternoon the unconditional surrender of Japan.
Truman agrees, though he calls it unconditional.
No qualification.
That was Japan's hope, was to surrender conditionally, to have some say in how it would happen.
In POW Camp 17, the prisoners sense something's up, but they don't know what. Lester Tenney tries a daring experiment. Speak to a guard without bowing.
Now, if you saw a Japanese guard 2 blocks away, you better stop, turn to him and bow, or you're beaten. And so I went outside and saw the Japanese guard right out there. And I just walked up to him, and in my best Japanese, I just said, "Konnichiwa, Tomodachi." And I never did stop and bowed. And he stood at attention. And within a matter of 5 or 6 seconds, he bowed to me. He bowed to me. The war is over. The war is over, period, just exactly like that.
On September 2nd, 1945, Japan signs the surrender documents. World War II is over.
The war was finally over. We were so relieved.
It's official. It's all over. It's total victory.
It's time to celebrate not only the end of the war, but the remarkable new bomb that helped win it. After years of secrecy, overnight, the gadget is big news.
And all of a sudden, it's not only out, but here it is in the newspaper in front of me. I bought a half a dozen papers of the different kinds, but it was a shock.
It's a whole new era, the atomic age, with its own Genesis story. Secret cities, massive factories, the genius and the general are suddenly part of the culture.
And the press went wild.
The atomic age loomed upon the threshold of history.
Suddenly the cat is out of the bag.
Well, what did you think of that bomb we dropped on the Japs?
It was new.
An American invention.
Thousands of able young scientists were called to the service.
Los Alamos Laboratory.
A secret laboratory in New Mexico. It was work, 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 and more work.
Here it is, General Groves.
Plutonium.
Plutonium.
Uranium.
Releasing unimaginable force.
The basic power of the universe.
And at the center of all of this,
Robert Oppenheimer.
Father of the atomic bomb.
One of the most famous people in all of America.
Trump's Einstein.
The triumph of the bomb, winning the war with science, seems the perfect American success story.
Good thing it was dropped, ended the war, saved American lives, end of story.
The bomb seems to have brought an answer for how to end the war, but it has also raised questions.
The question right away became, when are the Soviets going to get a weapon? When are they going to get the bomb?
Scientists who warned about Hitler having the bomb now worry about the US and Soviets getting into a competition to build more and bigger bombs, a nuclear arms race. Little do they know, it's already too late. The race started the minute Stalin saw pictures of Hiroshima.
Suddenly, this project that's on paper comes to reality, and the destructive possibilities of this bomb were made clear.
The Soviets felt very vulnerable, and that spurs Stalin into action. It's after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing that Stalin creates the crash program to catch up and create the Soviet nuclear weapon.
The Soviets have an invaluable head start, thanks to espionage. Not one, but two scientists at Los Alamos are spies.
Klaus Fuchs, who was German, and another spy who was an American, a graduate student at Harvard named Ted Hall.
Having two independent sources inside Los Alamos is an incredible espionage coup.
Well, imagine when Apple was designing the iPhone, and if Apple's competitors had two people in the room with Steve Jobs, listening to Steve Jobs work through the various difficulties and snags. They don't have to make the mistakes that Steve Jobs is making. That's what made Fuchs and Hall so valuable and so extraordinary in the history of espionage and in the history of science.
No one in the US has any idea how close the Soviets are to getting the bomb. With the war over, Americans are getting back to normal, enjoying peace. But the atomic bomb is a question mark hanging over the future.
The Manhattan Project is still in place. What to do about the bomb, how many we have, how many to build.
At the secret laboratory in New Mexico, the scientists are anxious to go home to their universities.
You had a group of young professors who had good jobs to go back to in academia, and you had young students who had not yet completed their studies.
You got to remember, they're living here in little wooden shacks with coal stoves, eating bad food on mud streets. So as soon as the war ended, everybody left. The town dropped from 4,000 people to like 1,000 people in just a matter of weeks.
Robert Oppenheimer, whose vision created Los Alamos, is one who leaves. The lab he built now seems destined to fade away. In the summer of 1945, Trinity, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki opened the door to the new age. But it won't be until a year later, in the summer of 1946, that major turning points will determine the future of the bomb.
We are here to make a choice between the quick and the dead.
It begins in June at the United Nations, when the U.S. offers the world a plan to get rid of the bomb.
1, manufacture of atomic bombs shall stop. 2, existing bombs shall be disposed of pursuant to the terms of the treaty.
America will give up its atomic bombs if other countries pledge not to build them and agree to inspections. It's an idea that will become known as trust but verify. The Soviets refuse to pledge anything unless America gives up the bomb first.
The battle to save mankind from destroying itself is still deadlocked. It is later than we think.
Debate will continue for months. It's late June 1946, and the nuclear arms race will soon explode.
Time now is measured in seconds.
5,
4, 3, 2, 1, fire!
Just a few weeks later, a huge fleet of warships is sent to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean by the atomic bomb. Today, they still lie where they sank, Bikini Lagoon. Here, in July 1946, the public would be invited to witness an atomic explosion for the first time. The U.S. military would discover how vulnerable it was to its own bomb, and the future of Los Alamos Laboratory would be guaranteed. All the result of an event appropriately named Crossroads. Crossroads is the brainchild of this man.
Louis Strauss, or Strauss as he liked to be called.
A curious figure of a man who had been a shoe salesman and had made himself very rich. And then he was an admiral in the Navy, but he never sailed a ship.
Extremely politically ambitious.
Strauss is worried about the Navy. How will the new atomic bomb affect its future?
Historically, what did we have in the country? We had an Army and a Navy.
What does the bomb mean for each of them? It's the thing to have. It's a winning weapon. Everybody wants it.
But only the Air Force has it. And in 1946, the Air Force is still part of the Army.
People have been arguing that the Navy's obsolete. Now, Air Forces will control how wars are fought and won.
The traditional line in the Navy during the Cold War, and it was, remember, the Soviet Union is our adversary, the Army is our enemy.
Louis Strauss thinks he has the perfect answer to the Navy's problem. A bomb test to prove Navy ships can survive atomic weapons. Operation Crossroads.
Sort of a contest between the Navy and the Air Force, in which Air Force bombers will try and sink Navy ships.
The first casualty in the contest is Leslie Groves. The Navy, not Groves, will be in charge of Crossroads. They'll do the test in the middle of the Pacific Ocean at the tiny island of Bikini. The Navy evicts the residents and assembles a target fleet. Over 90 captured German, Japanese, and surplus U.S. warships will be bombed. There'll be 3 explosions, Able, Baker, and Charlie. 1 in the air, 2 underwater. Crossroads is a huge operation. $100 million, 42,000 men, 240 ships, not counting the targets, instruments, cameras, and more cameras. Film, miles and miles of it. Animals, so doctors can study what the bomb does to living creatures. And reporters from all over the world.
It was a show. It was a spectacle.
At last, all was ready for Able Day, tentatively set
July 1st, 1946, the show begins.
Dave's dream is roaring down the runway, engines singing.
For the first test, Able, they'll drop the bomb from a plane.
Bomb bay doors are open.
The plane approaches. The bomb is dropped.
Unfolded are a myriad of majestic, startling, and awesome effects, a panoply that only the cameras can record in faithful detail.
The bomb, the same Fat Man model dropped on Nagasaki, has a force of 20,000 tons of TNT. B-17 drones flown by remote control are sent into the mushroom cloud to take measurements. It's the first nuclear explosion to be witnessed by the public. But the public is 18 miles away, and after all the buildup,
A bit disappointed as to the size of the flash.
You didn't see ships flying through the air, and the first reaction was, the atomic bomb, not such a big deal.
3 weeks later, a second test, Baker. This time, the bomb will be underwater. The scientists think it's a terrible idea. They warn that exploding an atomic bomb underwater will create a witch's brew of radioactivity, releasing enough plutonium to poison the entire armed forces of the U.S.
They knew what was going to happen when you set off an underwater explosion. It was going to make a lot of contamination. But I guess they lost out to Admiral Blandy.
Navy Admiral William Blandy is the man in charge of Crossroads. And from the start, he's got a PR problem.
I am not an atomic playboy, as one of my critics labeled me, exploding these bombs to satisfy my personal whim.
Many considered it a boondoggle.
The bomb will not start a chain reaction in the water, converting it all to gas and letting all the ships on all the oceans drop down to the bottom.
There was a tremendous amount of pressure, I think, on the Navy to try and convince the public that this was worthwhile.
Bikini Atoll and Baker Day, the underwater explosion of the 5th atomic bomb. The bomb and instruments are set into action. Aboard the Los Alamos firing ship, nerves are stretched to the breaking point. 5 radio control circuits will set off the blast in this prelude to push-button warfare.
3, 2, 1, fire!
An underwater shock wave is clearly visible. In the first 1 second, 2 million tons of seawater are lifted into the air. As the water rises, it creates a column nearly a half-mile wide. Now it starts to fall back. The water falling out of the sky creates a base surge, like the mist at the bottom of a waterfall. The surge, nearly 1,000 feet tall, completely envelops the target ships. No one has ever seen anything like it. The sheer power and magnitude of the atomic bomb. But so far, despite 2 of these bombs, the results look pretty good for the Navy. 75 ships survived, less than 20 sunk.
The Navy felt that they came out of it with flying colors, and Blandy said, yes, the Navy can withstand the atomic bomb.
The Navy plans to put sailors on these ships and sail them triumphantly back to the U.S. But there's a problem.
At first, there seemed to be little damage, but succeeding days told a different story.
The 1,000-foot-high wave of water that drenched the ships was highly radioactive. The ships are now contaminated.
Geiger counters rattle wildly. The area is loaded with death-dealing gamma, neutron, and other lethal rays. And there is no complete protection against this terrifying invisible killer.
At first, the Navy simply doesn't believe it.
You can't smell radiation, you can't feel it, and these Navy guys were just going to get back on their ships and survive the bomb.
Now they have no idea what to do.
The ignorance was rampant. There was no real plan for decontamination.
They try hosing down the ships with seawater. Trouble is, the seawater itself is now highly radioactive. And when the sailors go back to their own ships to change clothes, they contaminate those ships too. The man in charge of radiation safety, Army Dr. Stafford Warren, tries to cancel the operation.
Stafford Warren doesn't want the sailors back on the ships, but it's pretty hard to go up against the entire U.S. Navy.
In desperation, Stafford Warren gets a fish from the lagoon and places it against a piece of film. The fish is so radioactive, it exposes the film all by itself.
The glow was produced by the exposure of the film to radiation.
Finally, Admiral Blandy and the Navy are convinced. Crossroads is halted. It's been called the world's first nuclear disaster. Only 9 ships are ever successfully decontaminated. Most of the rest are towed away and deliberately sunk. The Air Force will remain the primary keeper of the bomb for now. But Crossroads turns out to be a good thing for Los Alamos.
I don't think the laboratory would have stayed in business very long had we not had a customer. But the Navy came in and gave us a job. It gave us some work to do and kept the laboratory going through some very uncertain times.
After July 1946, Los Alamos Lab will grow, building and testing more and more bombs over the coming decades. Crossroads also becomes part of popular culture. Even today, the Baker shot remains the most enduring single image of the power of the bomb. Just a few weeks after the second Crossroads shot, an unexpected event will give Americans another, much darker look at the bomb. And for the first time, a major public debate about using it will begin. On August 31st, the latest issue of the New Yorker magazine appears. On its cover, a whimsical portrait of Central Park on a summer day. Inside, a very different portrait of another city on a summer day. The entire issue is one single article, an essay by John Hersey about the experience of the people in Hiroshima, told through the eyes of 6 survivors.
One's a Catholic priest, one's a tailor's widow, a couple of them are doctors, kinds of people that Americans can relate to.
The special issue sells out in hours.
Hiroshima by John Hersey. This astounding report, written for the New Yorker magazine, has deeply affected thousands of Americans.
Radio networks in England, Canada, Australia, and the U.S. preempt regular programming and do live readings by actors.
This chronicle of suffering and destruction is not presented in defense of an enemy. It is broadcast as a warning that what happened to the people of Hiroshima a year ago could next happen anywhere. Chapter 1, A Noiseless Flash.
At exactly 15 minutes past 8 in the morning.
No one had ever seen the consequences of a nuclear bomb. And the knowledge of what this meant doesn't really soak in until afterwards.
Now, in August 46, a year after Hiroshima, one essay is giving the world a whole new perspective on the bomb.
It has enormous consequences. It begins to make people rethink their attitudes towards nuclear weapons.
But nuclear weapons are becoming the key to U.S. security.
Harry Truman and his advisors begin to think atomic weaponry can be the basis of diplomacy.
Former Secretary of War Henry Stimson worries that Americans are turning against nuclear weapons. So he writes a response to the New Yorker piece to justify using the bomb.
It says there were 2 choices, use the bomb or invade Japan. And it is a false framework. There were alternatives to both the bomb and an invasion.
Would Japan have surrendered without our using the bomb?
There's no way of answering it one way or the other. We cannot relive history.
If Truman had not used the bomb, why didn't he? My son was killed because you didn't use the bomb?
An American airplane.
The debate continues to this day. All that is certain is that life in the atomic age is turning out to be more complicated than it seemed when the bomb first appeared.